Next up we have Silvia Montello from the Association of Electronic Music. So nice to have you here. Off you go.
Right. Thank you, Chris. Hi, everybody. Lovely to see all your beautiful faces in a comedy club. I will try not to make too many bad jokes because I'm not a professional stand-up. But what I will try to do is give you a little bit of context about dance music, how and why it struggled as much as it did during the pandemic, where we are in its recovery, or not, as the case may be, and some things that we as an association are working with the electronic industry to kind of look to the future to see how we can make that recovery happen over time. Cool, so just to give a bit of context for those of you that don't know about the Association for Electronic Music and why it is that I'm up here talking to you about anything. So we are a global trade organisation for dance and electronic music specifically. So we work across currently 27 territories, and we work across all the verticals of the dance music industry. I hate that word, but apologies. So through our work, we're basically in tune with everything from the creators to the labels to the rights holders, retail, technology, talent, live, festivals, and we interact with them and we support them, and obviously through that we get the kind of global picture about where things are at the moment, and that helps us to then do the work that we need to do to support our industry and to support our ecosystem. The reason I put this slide up and mentioned a number of the names is because I'm going to go and talk about our ecosystem, because that's really one of the reasons why the pandemic hit as hard as it did. So we are a tightly connected ecosystem in dance music, even more so than perhaps some people think. So during the pandemic, obviously there was a lot of talk about the fact that live disappeared. Live was a real struggle. But at the same time, lots of people were saying, well, it's okay because streaming and music consumption and listening actually went up. So it was kind of okay, right? Well, not really. And not specifically within dance music, because dance music is primarily intended for the dance floor consumption and for the audience. The producers and creators of the music rely often, primarily, on other people to disseminate their music to an audience, and that's done through the dance floor. When live comes down, the producers struggle because the DJs don't have anywhere to play. They may have live streams, but they didn't pay them very much, or if at all. The festival owners, the venues, the club promoters, everybody else didn't have that live sector to bring in their revenues either. DJs were out of work. Producers could still release their music, but the streaming numbers wouldn't be as great because there weren't any audiences having that music introduced to them. So it's all very, very circular. So everybody in the whole value chain was struggling, specifically in dance, because the DJs who perform the music and the producers who create the music are two different entities. The producers carried on releasing, but there really wasn't that kind of outlet that we would normally have. So also, we are a uniquely interconnected ecosystem, and this isn't necessarily a good thing, and I've put some of the challenges up here as well. So we've already mentioned that producers and creators are often different to those people that are actually performing their music. Often those producers aren't credited correctly, so they don't receive public performance income. Sometimes they don't even receive the correct streaming income. And I'll go on to talk about that a little bit. The revenues are directly related to DJ play and audience interaction loops. So the more DJs are out there playing a particular tune, the more the audience engages with it, the more that turns it into a big hit, and the more it's a big hit, the more it's going to stream. That's the kind of, that's the circular chain that we have. But it's very reliant on each other. DJs are largely relying on other people's music to make their money, and they traditionally haven't generated money through streaming, because DJ mixes until recently haven't really been on streaming platforms and haven't really had a fee for the DJ associated with them either. And then outside of mainstream dance hits, the big EDM records, which isn't really what we're talking about here, we're talking about cross-genre, niche genres. Radio, mainstream radio, doesn't really feature in terms of actually creating a hit. You don't get a lot of psytrance records that are on daytime Radio 1, for example. Some of us might think that's not necessarily a bad thing, but that was just an example about how it's only really the mainstream stuff that can rely on your traditional outlets like radio. So with that depressing context in mind, I'm going to have to talk about live. This is very important. People are talking about the dance music recovery, live clubs at festivals. Well, everything's open again, so everything's rosy now, isn't it, right? Right? Nah, not at all, unfortunately. The good news is the fact that events can go ahead, and there have been a lot of them that have been scheduled. I'm trying to think of any other good news to add to that section, but it's difficult because I have to tell you about the bad news, and it's quite brutal. So for a number of reasons, both within and without the music industry's control, there are lots of infrastructure problems around clubs, venues, festivals. Over the pandemic, there is a figure of something like 20% of UK clubs went under, and there's a massive impact on the hospitality sector altogether. So lots of people actually left the hospitality trade. And why that's important is because there's now a shortage of people doing security. There's a shortage of bar staff. There's a shortage of people doing the production infrastructure that's required at festivals and live events. At the same time, because of economic factors and Brexit, sorry to mention the B word, there's also a real issue in terms of the cost of that infrastructure. So the cost basis of putting on a festival or a live event has gone up somewhere around the 20 to 30% mark. That's roughly what we're hearing, not just from the UK, but outside of the UK as well. When you add to that the fact that DJs have to often go to a number of different venues, not just, different countries sometimes in the same weekend, the cost of flights has gone up exponentially and the cost of accommodation has gone up exponentially. So the cost basis of everything has gone up, but people's tolerance for ticket prices hasn't gone up at the same time. So there's a real commercial struggle going on at the moment within the dance music sector, across pretty much every level of that supply chain. The outlook for that, well, the outlook is not great for certainly the rest of 2022 and probably 2023 as well. When you add in the fact that there are certain other parts of the supply chain and value chain that are also struggling financially, we heard about Pollen, big ticketing sort of ticket and event sort of offerings that they were working with lots of the dance music industry for, holidays abroad and those kinds of big festival events. They went into administration owing a lot of people money. There are other parts of the supply chain that are struggling as well. And if people go down and owe money to the promoters or the venues or the rights holders, then everybody's suffering down the chain. So we are in a bit of a bad place at the moment. I'd love to bring you some light and laughter about that. Let's just look forward to 2024, when hopefully we will have come out of this pit. But I think most people think it's going to get worse before it gets better. So just moving on to get played, get paid. The reason that I have highlighted this is it's one of the overarching tenets of what the association does. We believe very strongly across the whole value chain that anyone whose music is played should get paid for that music being played. The reason that this has been traditionally an issue in dance music is because there's been a lack of proper recognition of what tracks actually get played in DJ sets. We're still in a situation at the moment where a lot of clubs, festivals, venues, their nights don't have any kind of music recognition technology, and they don't have a standardized and accurate way of reporting actually what got played by the DJ. Sometimes they rely on people scribbling their set list on a piece of paper, if they can even remember what they played and what order they played it in. The reason why that's important is because the people making the music that the DJ plays deserve to get paid for their music, and that's not happening at the moment. As part of dance music's recovery, we genuinely think that the adoption of music recognition technology on a far more widespread basis will help the value chain, especially for the rights holders and the creators and the producers of the music. Everybody in this business at the moment needs to be able to get every piece of revenue that they can from every single revenue stream that's available to them. and the music recognition technology is there. There are going to be some big announcements and big advances in this towards the end of this year, which is very, very exciting. We know the technology is there, and we also know that now there are enough companies looking at the metadata and being able to actually provide accurate metadata to match with the music that gets recognized through the MRT systems. Metadata is not everybody's cup of tea in terms of the most exciting thing in the world, but it's desperately important, and even more so in electronic music, where you've got so many intricacies around the difference between the producer, the creator, a featured artist, a collab, various other performers that might be on the track. All of these things traditionally haven't really either been captured or reflected or monitored properly for that revenue stream to come through. And we do think it's going to revolutionize the industry, because the net result of that, when the CMOs and PROs are really on board, the collection societies that are collecting on everything that gets played in a festival or a club or a shop or wherever it might be, when they're actually able to identify the music and pay it out properly, electronic music's market share will go up to where it deserves to be. At the moment, a lot of that money that's being collected is then attributed on the basis of pro rata market share, which disadvantages dance and electronic music generally, disadvantages independent labels and smaller creators generally. So we do think that's going to be a big part of a recovery. Streaming and download platforms are taking electronic music much more seriously now, which is fantastic. DJ mixes being represented and downloadable or streamable in the form in which they're intended is starting to become a real big part of the industry. DJ mixes have been happening since the late 70s, but it's taken the streaming platforms a little time to sort of catch up on how best to actually be able to allow those to be consumed and be able to monitor them correctly and pay through correctly and have all of the clearances and the rights. It's quite complicated, but they're getting there, and there's some really good work being done now. There's also work being done in terms of finding a way to pay the DJs that have put those sets together on streaming platforms and make sure that they've got a share of the pie as well. That's going to be very helpful for the proper consumption of dance music, continuous mixes, as you would hear in the club, not broken up with bits of like random silences in between the tracks. It's actually going to reflect what our community is about and how we consume music on the dance floor. And then just to wrap up, these are also really important areas for the recovery of dance music: diversity, equity, inclusion, sustainability. We are seeing the growth of our genre. We were seeing it during the pandemic, and in almost all territories that were measured, we saw that the market share of dance and electronic music had gone up in 2020 and 2021. And in the US, which is a really key market, the hip-hop market share had flattened, but dance and electronic music was going up. And we are feeling that there is a real growth in the more mainstream adoption and consumption of dance and electronic music. There is some recovery there, and there is actually growth there, which is really, really good for us to see. And with people like Beyonce making house tracks and Drake making house tracks, and that's something that has really resonated with the US audience. We think that that territory, which is the biggest music territory in the world, is going to become an even bigger player when it comes to various different genres, not just EDM. Producers and creators, in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, we are now finally seeing so much more effort and energy put into gender parity and parity around the ethnic diversity of people that are producing and creating the music, and this is incredibly important. This is going to help dance music recover, and it also reminds people of the roots of dance music. Dance music was about black culture and gay culture and inclusivity, and it had moved away from that. Why this is also recovery in terms of commercial is the fact that with the impact on the commerce of the ecosystem that I mentioned earlier, it's likely that more venues and promoters and festivals will be looking at more equitable lineups rather than relying on paying the same old 55-year-old white male superstar DJ shit tons of money, but actually looking at how they could be supporting people who are up and coming in the industry as well. So the fee structure, we believe, is going to be reviewed quite heavily. That will also apply to the DJ. That's applied to the DJs and performers as well, beg your pardon. I'll skip industry infrastructure a little bit, but climate and economic considerations in terms of recovery. Dance music doesn't live in a bubble. If we have a recession coming up, which we will, if there's economic impacts globally, cost of living crisis, energy bills, which are a huge factor, then our sector is going to reflect those challenges in the same way as any other music sector. So that's why 2024 is probably now the point where we try and look forward to that point where we genuinely feel there's going to be recovery. I'm not going to mention NFTs and metaverse because you've got experts about to talk about that. And those are going to be big areas for dance, as in the same way that they're going to be for the rest of the music industry as well. But I hope that's given a little bit of insight into where we are, where we look to the future to get out of there. And yeah, 2024, bring it on. Thank you.